If you're new to Home Assistant, then backups might be one of those jobs you've been meaning to get around to. But if you've been using it for years, you could have hundreds of devices, automations and dashboards that have taken countless hours to build. So if your Home Assistant machine stopped working right now, how long would it take you to get your smart home running again? Whether you've only just installed Home Assistant or you've been running it for years, could you restore everything, or would your backups disappear along with the system they were supposed to protect? Today, we're going to make sure that that doesn't happen. Hey everyone, my name's Simon and welcome to Byte of Geek, a channel that's all about Home Assistant and smart home technology. In this video, we're going to go through how to set up backups in Home Assistant to give you the best level of protection for your smart home should something go horribly wrong. This is something that applies not only to those who might have just set up Home Assistant, but also those that have been running it for a while and perhaps haven't quite got round to making sure your system is properly protected. Now, you might be thinking, but I do backups. I back up onto the mini PC that Home Assistant runs on. Well, sorry to tell you, but what you've got there is a false sense of security. You see, what you're doing is storing your backups on the same machine that your smart home runs on. So if the drive in that computer fails, then you've lost everything and you're in no better position than if you weren't doing those backups at all. What we're looking at achieving today is not just backing up your system, but backing up with multiple layers of protection. You see, in the data security world, there's something called the 3-2-1 data protection rule. 3 copies of your data stored on 2 different storage types with 1 copy stored off-site. Having a combination like this greatly reduces the risk of completely losing your smart home system. Now, you might be thinking, well, that all sounds good, but it feels a bit extreme for something that's just turning my lights on and off. And in a way, perhaps it is, but as your smart home grows, it can quickly be something you and your family rely upon every day, with all those automations and the scenes and dashboards and custom routines, everything that you've built, all of which may have taken months or even years to perfect. If something then goes wrong, then a proper backup strategy means that you can restore everything and get your smart home running again extremely quickly, rather than having to rebuild the entire system from scratch. Back in 2022, I did a video about backing up Home Assistant onto a Synology NAS using an integration called Samba Backup, and that's been great, and I've been using that for quite a while now. However, whilst I could continue to use that, there are now more integrated ways of doing this in Home Assistant. In 2023, the option to add your NAS as a storage location in Home Assistant was introduced. However, it wasn't until 2025 when there was a complete overhaul to the backup system that you could effectively stop using something like Samba Backup. The updated backup system in Home Assistant introduced schedules, retention and encryption, making it a better choice for a more advanced backup solution. So to start with, we're going to configure how our backups are going to work. I'm going to do this on a new system, but if you already have backups configured, then you might find this useful as well. You'll find the backups option in the system settings, and if this is the first time you're setting this up, then your screen will look something like this. Clicking on the Setup Backup button prompts us as to how we want our backups to work. If this is the first time you're configuring backups, then you'll be shown an encryption key that is used with your Home Assistant backups when it comes to restoring them. And I can't stress this enough, how important it is that you take a copy of this encryption key, either written down, a picture on your phone, or stored as a file on another computer. as there are certain situations in which you'll need this key to be able to restore a backup in the future, and I'll explain those in just a moment. So once we've noted the key down, we're then prompted to choose a backup profile, either recommended, which backs up everything every night and keeps the 3 most recent backups, or you've got custom, which will allow you more control over the exact details of your backups. Now, you might be happy with recommended, but there are good reasons to choose the custom option, especially if you're just getting up and running with Home Assistant. I'm going to select custom, at which point I'm then prompted to configure the backup. First, we have the schedule, which we can have either never, daily or custom. Then we have the time we want the backup to occur, which is system optimal or custom. And finally, we have the retention, which defaults to 3 backups, but you can also have forever or custom as well. It's worth pointing out here that with the custom retention, it can either be the number of backups or the number of days. So depending on what you configure in the schedule, you will get different results. If we start at the top with schedule then, and Home Assistant recommends daily backups, and that's the safest default for most people. However, if your system changes very little, the custom option lets you choose particular days instead. For example, maybe you do most of your configuration changes like me at the weekend. In that case, you might want to back up on something like Saturday and Sunday with a regular midweek backup on a Wednesday, just for good measure. That way you should always have a recent backup available from before you went ahead and broke everything. I'm going to leave the backup time to system optimal because the default seems quite reasonable to me. But if you've got something else taking place on your host machine at this particular time, then it is something you can change if required. And then you've got retention, which can be based on either the number of days or the number of backups. I would suggest opting for the number of backups and keeping no fewer than 10. With the days I've selected, that gives me around 3 weeks of backup history, although you can keep more if you have sufficient storage available. Clicking on next, and then we get to choose what is being backed up. At the top, we have the estimated backup size, and then further down, we have Home Assistant settings, which are automatically backed up and not something you can switch off. If you want to keep the data that is recorded by your devices in Home Assistant so that you can see it in things like graphs, then you'll need to ensure that history is toggled on. And then for media and the share folder, well, that really is a personal choice. I don't have anything that's important in these locations at the moment, so I'm leaving those toggled off. But as you progress with your smart home, this might be something you come back to and change if you're storing anything that gets saved by any applications. Finally, you can select what apps you want to back up. And if you don't want the hassle of reinstalling and reconfiguring any of the apps you've installed, then I suggest you leave this as all to be backed up. However, you can set that to custom and then just choose specific ones if you want. Once you click next, then you'll just get this message about backup locations with a prompt to save and create a backup, which if you then click on that, Home Assistant will start creating your first backup. So then you can see on the top here, we have the progress bar of what Home Assistant is doing with the backup. And when it's finished, we should get a message like this telling us that it's complete and it's stored in one location. Now that one location will be on the machine running Home Assistant, and if we click on that one automatic backup, we'll then see the backup that's being created, and we've got a little icon here showing it's being stored on the disk of the machine. Elsewhere on the screen we have any other backups that have been created when we've been updating any apps, as well as any manual backups that we've gone and performed ourselves. And we can also view our backup encryption key and change it to a new one to be used with future backups if needed. Then underneath that, we have our automatic backup configuration that we've just gone and completed. We have our schedule, the backup content, including any apps, and then where our backup is stored. And if we just click on that, you'll see a familiar screen, but down at the bottom, there is now a location section. And it's here you can see we've got our local system backup. And if we click on the little cog, then we can make changes specifically for this location. So we can use the retention settings that we created originally, which are the global settings, or we can change that just for this backup location. We can also turn off encryption for this backup location as well. So if you're using a NAS and you're happy not to have it encrypted, then you can change that here without affecting any other backup locations. And right at the bottom, we have the behavior of our backups when you update the apps in Home Assistant. And this is personal preference, really. If you want all apps to be backed up automatically when they get updated, then turn this on. Personally, I do it on a per app basis, as there are certain apps that would be a real pain to set up again if there was an issue with the system. Okay, so now you've got what I would call a basic backup setup. This gives us a backup in addition to the live system, but because they're both stored on the same machine, a single drive failure could still take both of them out. Now, if you have a NAS, then it's a great place to store your Home Assistant backups in addition to those being created on your Home Assistant machine. I'm going to show you how I've set it up on my Unraid NAS, but the principle is pretty much the same regardless of what NAS you're using. The key things to point out before you start this are that on your NAS, you'll need to create a folder for your backups, and then you'll also need a user account that has permissions to write files into that folder. Ideally, you want that to be a dedicated Home Assistant account rather than just one that you've set up for accessing the NAS. This is what I've done with Unraid, creating a Home Assistant user and Home Assistant folder inside my backups folder. In Home Assistant, you then want to go over to Settings and then System, and then choose the storage option. This is where we can now specify our NAS as being additional storage that Home Assistant can use for backups. At the top of the screen, we've got a breakdown of how our storage on the Home Assistant machine is currently being used, but we want to move down to network storage and just click on Add Network Storage. On this screen, we're now setting up what that storage is for. So we start by giving it a name that you'll know it by in Home Assistant. So I'm just using the name of my NAS. Then we select that we want this to be used for backups, but as you can see, you can have it for other things as well if you need to. Next, we need to enter the address or the domain name of the NAS. So I'll just pop mine in here. We then need to select the protocol we're using to access the NAS, and for my setup I'm using CIFS, and I would say that for the majority of people, unless you've changed it on your NAS, then that will be the option you need to select as well. Finally, we then just need to specify the folder that we created for the backups to be stored in, and then the username and the password of the account that has the permission to write to that folder. Once we've entered all of that, you just click on connect, and then back on the storage screen, you should then see you've got your NAS all set up as a storage location. Going back into our backups, and if we select locations where backups are stored, and then scroll down to locations at the bottom, we can see that my NAS is now shown. So if I just toggle that on, now, when we do a backup, you'll see that not only does Home Assistant do our local backup, but it also backs up onto our NAS as well. And if I just switch over to Unraid and look into my backups folder, you'll see that I've now got an automatic backup that's just been created. Of course, I missed the subfolder name off when setting up the location, so I just need to update the network location settings with that again. And now my new backups will go into that Home Assistant folder, which if I run another backup, you can now see that here. We now have our live system and backups stored on 2 different machines. But to complete our 3-2-1 strategy, we still need 1 copy stored off-site. Now, if you don't have a NAS, or maybe you want to protect your backup even further by having an off-site backup, then cloud storage is a good option here that Home Assistant supports very well. Many of us will have a free tier of storage that came with things like our phones or computers, or you may have got some as part of something like Microsoft 365. However, there are plenty of other options available to use as well, many of which have free tier levels that will be enough to store a small number of backups. Home Assistant has added support for a lot of these recently, so if you have something like Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, along with many others, then you can use those quite easily. I'm going to add my OneDrive storage as another backup location for Home Assistant, and to do that we go to Settings, then Devices and Services, and on the Integrations tab we then click Add Integration. If I search for Microsoft, you'll see that I have several services available. Likewise, searching for Google brings up a similar list, including Google Drive. For this demonstration though, I'm going to select OneDrive. This opens up a new browser window asking me to confirm that Home Assistant can access my account. Now, this is my logged in account, and if you're going to use a different account or you're not logged in, then you will be prompted for a username and password. For me, I just need to click on accept, and then as you can see, I then get a message telling me that OneDrive is now linked. Back in Home Assistant, and then I just need to specify a folder name for the backups, and you can see here it says that this folder will be created inside the app Home Assistant folder on your cloud storage. Once you click on submit, you can then just finish off setting up the OneDrive details, and now this looks like any other device in Home Assistant with storage details for your entities. If we go into backups then, and you'll see in the off-site locations that OneDrive now shows up here, and we can then just enable that. And if I just do a quick backup, and you'll see that it's now backing up to NABU Casa because I have a subscription, as well as to OneDrive. And once that's finished, if we then check on OneDrive, you can see that we've now got a backup folder inside the Home Assistant apps folder. And if we click into that, then we have 2 files from the backup. As with the other backup locations, you can configure your cloud storage to use the global settings, or you can specify custom ones as well. So you might do that if you don't have a lot of cloud storage, but you do have on your NAS. Now, regardless of whether you have a NAS or cloud storage, if you subscribe to NABU Casa for the remote access to Home Assistant and all the other benefits that you get, you'll find that one of those is that you automatically get up to 5 GB storage as part of your subscription. You can only store 1 backup at a time, so depending on what you're doing with Home Assistant and how many changes you're making, you may find that a little limiting, but for established systems, it could be enough to meet your needs. This will be automatically added to your backup locations when you subscribe, and you can start a 30-day trial to test it out if you're setting up a new system. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to restoring backups, you may need the encryption key in order to be able to use the backup at a later date. There are some conditions to this, and it basically comes down to this. If you're backing up to Home Assistant Cloud, then backups are always encrypted and you'll need a matching key to be able to restore them. When you back up to a NAS or other local storage, then the key will only be needed if you've turned encryption on. And if you download a backup via Home Assistant's backup page, then the backup is automatically decrypted as it does it. and so you don't generally need the key for that. If you're setting up a new system following a hardware failure and the backup you're restoring is encrypted, then you'll need to supply the encryption key. However, if you previously downloaded the backup through Home Assistant, that downloaded copy will have been decrypted and shouldn't require the key. And it's also worth noting that if you change the encryption key in Home Assistant and you have backups using the old key and you need to restore one of those, then you'll need the old key in order to do so. One final option that you have for storing your backups off-site is to use something like a storage box from Hetzner, although other providers are available. Similar to cloud storage, this lets you connect in many different ways, letting you store your data there just as if it was connected to your own system. And a common approach for transferring your data to something like this would be to use RClone. And whilst Home Assistant doesn't have a built-in integration for it, you can install one via hacks. I use RClone with my NAS and it works great once you've got it all set up. RClone Backup itself supports many different storage providers, including OneDrive and Google Cloud, but it's not as straightforward to set up as the built-in cloud integrations in Home Assistant. I'm not going to go through the process of setting this up in this video, but if you'd like to see a video on that, then hit the like button down below. So at this point we have our live system, a backup on another machine and a further copy stored off-site, giving us the 3 layers of our 3-2-1 backup strategy. There's an old saying that a backup isn't truly a backup until you've tested that it can be restored. Ideally, you'd do that on a spare piece of hardware or a temporary Home Assistant installation, rather than experimenting on the system that you rely upon every day. If you're going to try that out, then there are 2 slightly different ways you might restore a backup. If Home Assistant is still running, restoring a backup is a very simple process. Just go to your list of backups and select the backup you want to restore, at which point you'll then be showing everything that the backup contains. Now, if an update or configuration change has caused widespread problems, then you'll probably want to restore everything. That's usually the simplest option in this situation and should get you back up and running relatively quickly. But perhaps you've updated or reconfigured an app and only that app is causing a problem. In that case, you can select it individually from the list. Either way, once you've chosen what you want to restore, you just click on the restore button. However, if the original machine or its drive has completely failed, you'll first need to install Home Assistant on the replacement hardware. On the initial welcome screen, you can then upload a backup from your computer or sign into Home Assistant Cloud and restore the backup stored there. And depending on the size of your system and what you're trying to restore, the process can be a little slow. It very much depends, but it's not an instant process. So there you go. That's how you set up your Home Assistant backups, but more importantly, that's how you go about giving your system the best level of protection should something go wrong. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, and why not subscribe to the channel for more smart home content like this. But as always, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.